Hi, everybody. This is Brendan Hall with the Energy Star program. I think we'll give everyone just another minute or two to log on. I see our numbers still ticking up. All right, things seem to have leveled off. So anyway, thank you for joining. Today we have two guest speakers on to talk about unique building identifiers for state and local governments. So I hope you're in the right place. We can go to the next slide, please. And really we'll spend most of the time with those two speakers, who I'll introduce in just 1 second, and then leave a good amount of time for Q&A at the end of the presentation, hopefully. Next slide, please. And so our two speakers today are Mark Borkum from PNNL and Chris Sanchez from Miami-Dade County. Mark is a computer scientist at PNNL in Richland, Washington. He's the software architect, lead software developer, and lead data scientist for the UBID project. And he's also a software developer for the Building Energy Asset Score research project, focusing on the implementation of the project's building sync, XML import and export capabilities. Chris has a background in ecology, extreme heat, and sustainability, and works for the Miami-Dade County Office of Resilience, where his primary role is to prepare analyses, implementation, and reporting on the county's greenhouse gas emissions inventories, climate action strategy, and sustainable buildings program. So we have two speakers who know their stuff here to talk about UBID, and without further ado, I'll hand things over to Mark. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Brendan, for the introduction, and thank you, Celeste, and the other organisers for the invitation to speak today. It's great to be here. And hello, everyone. I'm here to talk to you today about Unique Building Identifiers, UBID, and I'd like to give you an overview of UBID and also show you some examples of the use of UBID. Maybe you'd like to use it in your state or local government. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start by introducing the problem. And then I'm going to introduce the UBID concept and also show you what a UBID is and how you obtain a UBID, what a UBID looks like on a map, for example. Then I'm going to show a case study that we're working on right now, and then speak about a few highlights over the years for the UBID project, and then talk about next steps if you'd like to get involved. Next slide, please. And so what is the problem? What is the problem that UBID is attempting to solve? There are various stakeholders, building owners, utilities, cities, ESCs. They're all generating very large volumes of data. And policymakers seek to aggregate that data, join it together, cross-reference it, and analyze these data sets and use those analyses to inform their decisions. But there's a problem. There's no uniform method for identifying the records in these different data. And so there's no uniform method for cross-referencing that data. And as a result, many of these data sets are siloed. They can't be cross-referenced easily. Next slide, please. If you have a data set that, for example, contains street addresses, maybe they're identifying buildings, well, these aren't ideal for cross-referencing data sets. You could have accuracy issues, consistency issues. Perhaps the coordinates that you get when you geolocate that street address are out in the middle of the street. Perhaps there are ambiguities in your street addresses, so you might have multiple buildings on the same parcel, and the street address contains a range of buildings. Perhaps your building doesn't have a street address. Maybe it's a new construction and you haven't got one yet, or maybe you're somewhere that doesn't have street addresses. Perhaps your building is on the corner of a city block and it has more than one street address. And all of these cases, and there are many, many more, make it very difficult to cross-reference data sets using street addresses. If you're a city, you might assign unique building IDs, and every city tends to have their own way of doing this, and all the IDs are different. and you often need even more data and metadata, and you often need to write code in order to relate your buildings to the physical space itself. And if you want to try and cross-reference a GIS dataset with a building ID-based dataset, well, that's even more difficult. Next slide, please. So enter the UBID, the Unique Building Identifier. UBID is a natural key. And what we mean by that is it's a code string, and within that code string, it encodes information similar to the vehicle identification number that you find on your car. The UBID is encoding within itself a 2D geometry. And as such, you can use it to identify building footprints and land parcels. The way that we do that, and I'm going to show you a worked example, is by calculating the information that we need to encode in the UBID string from the location and the extent of the geometry. And this makes UBID very useful for things like asset management and research, because it standardizes and harmonizes the way that you identify things that occupy space. In this case, buildings and land parcels, but you can assign UBIDs to other things too. And once you've assigned your UBIDs, it's very straightforward to cross-reference UBID-assigned datasets with each other. And we provide freely available open source software to do this. And UBID can then be used for a variety of use cases. Here are some I've listed, such as energy benchmarking, energy metering, green building certification. You can also use it in your smart cities to identify where the individual things within the city are located. And as I mentioned, we've got lots of open source code, and you can find that and other documentation in our GitHub repository that's linked from this slide. Next slide, please. So before we have all of these different data sets, and all of the ways that we need to cross-reference them are different depending on which pair of data sets we choose. But once we've assigned UBIDs to those data, we can cross-reference any pair of data sets using the UBID tooling. Next slide, please. So how do you get a UBID? And once you've got a UBID, what do you do with it? Well, there are various ways that you can get a UBID. You could start with, as I mentioned earlier in the talk, with a geometry, so that's number 4. And from that, you can extract the minimum data that you need in order to encode a UBID, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Or you can start on the left-hand side of this slide with a street address and geolocate that street address, receiving a pair of latitude and longitude coordinates, and then you can use that to get a UBID code string. Once you've got your UBID code string, you can decode it and get the information that you encoded. And if you have that decoded information, you can encode it again and get the original UBID code string. And this round tripping capability is very important. Next slide, please. So here's an example UBID. This might be the first UBID that you've ever seen. This is a UBID for a baseball field in San Francisco. And the UBID is, when we encode it as a natural key, it contains 5 pieces of information. The first piece of information is the location, and that's a grid cell on the open location code grid. And then the next 4 pieces of information are the north, east, south, and west extents. And I'll talk a little bit about what those are in the forthcoming slides. Now, there's a very important feature of the open location code grid. What it does is it subdivides the surface of the Earth into smaller rectangles. And it then takes one of those rectangles and subdivides it again, and then again and again in a recursion. Each of those subdivisions increases the resolution of the grid. It also means that the grid cells get smaller and smaller. So when we measure a UBID extent at a low OLC grid resolution level using large grid cells, we will have extents that are small numbers. And as we increase the resolution and the grid cells get smaller, the extents get larger. And you can see this in the 4th column of the table. The UBID that we see on the screen here is at grid resolution level 11. And that's important. It's important because at grid resolution level 11, you have grid cells that are approximately 8 by 11 feet, and these are good for measuring the extents of buildings. Next slide, please. So let's do this example. Here we're looking at the map with the baseball field. Next slide, please. And here we have a rough depiction of the building footprint geometry. This is PowerPoint after all. Next slide, please. From the geometry, we can calculate the center of mass, or the centroid. And depending on the geometry, the centroid might be in places that you might not necessarily expect. So I haven't drawn this very well, but this is actually a multi-polygon, where the inner ring, the field itself, is not considered to be part of the building footprint. And so that's why the centroid is in the diamond. Next slide, please. We then calculate the minimum bounding rectangle for the geometry. And so this rectangle, you can imagine it's the smallest possible rectangle that covers the geometry. Next slide, please. And now we can overlay the grid. And here I've chosen a low resolution grid. And this is just to make the depiction easier. And so you can see that some of the parts of the rectangle are neatly aligned with the grid. Others are somewhere in the grid cell. The centroid is very much within a grid cell. And so in the next slide, please. What we're doing here is now we're snapping the centroid and the bounding box to the grid. And in the next slide, please, we can then use the centroid to measure the extents of the bounding rectangle. So you can see in the north direction, there's one grid cell that is required, but in the east direction, there are 2 grid cells required. In the south direction, there's 1 grid cell, and in the west direction, there's 1 grid cell. Next slide, please. And so now we can write the UBID code string as a natural key. And so we take the identifier for the centroid, and that's our first component. And then the second through 5th components are the north, east, south, and west extents. Next slide, please. And here's the original UBID, this time at grid resolution level 11. And as I mentioned, this is approximately 8 by 11 feet for the grid cells. And so the extents are somewhat larger. This demo, by the way, is available online, and I've included a link. Next slide, please. So now I'd like to talk you through a case study of using UBID. This is working with Green Building United and the city of Philadelphia. And just a shout out to Leanne and Sophia. Next slide, please. So Philadelphia, back please. Philadelphia publishes a number of open data sets, and I've just listed a few of them here. They've got many, many more. What's interesting about these data sets is they all have different qualities to them. Some of the data sets have the Philadelphia building ID, some of them have the Energy Star ID, some of them have what they call parcel numbers. Some of the data are identified by address, some of them by building footprint geometries and land parcel geometries, and some of the data have lat-long coordinates. What's interesting as well about the data is it's different aspects of the same buildings or the same land parcels. And so next slide, please. What we'd like to do is to match the buildings to the land parcels, and then match the land parcels to the property assessments, filter that data, and then hopefully identify energy savings opportunities and other policies that we might want to put in place. And you can see I've annotated the diagram here with some of the data that's available. And so in the building footprint data set at the top of the diagram, we have the building ID. And if we have that, we can find data about the building in Energy Star, which would be very useful. If we have the property number, the PIN, then we can join that with the assessments. And the assessments have lots of interesting data. There's the year of construction for the building, there's a category code, interior and exterior condition, also the heating type and the fuel source. If we were able to perhaps use UBID cross-reference to join the building footprints with the land parcels, then we could join that data with the assessments, filter the buildings, and maybe we could look for buildings that are using heating types and fuel sources that could be replaced. Next slide, please. So let's think about doing that. We've got 2 data sets that we'd like to join, a data set of building footprints and a data set of land parcels. We're going to use two types of methods with addresses and UBIDs, and within UBIDs, we're going to do 2 types of matching. I'll talk about that in a second. So the 3 ways that we're going to try and cross-reference these data sets are addresses, where The same address might appear many times in building footprints dataset and many times in the land parcels dataset. We're also going to try assigning UBIDs to the building footprints and the land parcels, and then matching many UBIDs on the left with many UBIDs on the right. And then for the third kind, we're going to try matching many building footprints with just one land parcel. And there are a few interesting things about these data sets. There are more land parcels, there are more building footprints than there are land parcels. Some records don't have addresses, and 7% of the records have duplicate addresses, which is going to make the address matching somewhat more challenging. Next slide, please. So what do I mean by one to many, many to many, these matching approaches? Consider a popular app where you rent bed and breakfasts. It has a database, and that database could have some tables within it. There might be a house table with information about houses for rent, and a hosts table with information about proprietors of those houses, and then a tenant table about the people who are renting those houses. There are natural relationships between houses, hosts, and tenants, and they have cardinalities. So there's a one-to-many relationship between hosts and houses, because a host can have many houses, but a house can only have one host. But then there's a many-to-many relationship between houses and tenants, because a house can have many tenants, and the same tenant can rent many houses. So for us, in this approach for addresses and for UBIDs, what we're saying is that there's a many-to-many relationship between building addresses and land parcel addresses, or there's a many-to-many relationship between building footprints and land parcels. Next slide, please. Now, there are some other issues that we need to account for. When we look at the geometries in these data sets, we find that they're different. And this is to be expected. The land parcel is likely larger than the building footprint. But one of the things that we found, on the next slide, please, is that the majority of the geometries for the land parcels are shifted slightly to the west. And so if you look at the image on the right-hand side, you can see that there's a slight gap between the two adjacent building footprints. And then in the image on the right, you can see that the geometry for the land parcel in green is shifted slightly to the west and actually is over that gap. So this is actually going to present some challenge for the UBID approach, because the UBID approach is using the information about the location and extent of the building footprints and the land parcels in order to perform the cross-reference. Next slide, please. And so here are the results. We actually did surprisingly well with all three methods. So we matched, using addresses, 92% of the buildings and 79% of the parcels. And this is pretty good, considering 7% of the records didn't have addresses, and all of the different issues that I mentioned earlier about ambiguities and inconsistencies in addresses came into play. For UBID, we got substantially more matches, over 3 million hits. Almost all of the buildings were matched by the UBID approach, and 97% of the parcels were matched. And this is pretty good for many-to-many matching. But as I mentioned earlier, many-to-many means we're assuming that there's a lot of UBIDs on the left-hand side that are matching a lot of UBIDs on the right-hand side. So we need a way of selecting the quote-unquote best match within the set, because we want to know which land parcel is the best match for this building footprint. The way that we do that in a UBID is we assign each match what we're calling a quality score, and we rank each of the matches by their quality score, and then select the match with the highest quality score. And then we call that the many-to-one matching. With that approach, we still match almost all of the buildings, but now we've slimmed down the set of parcels that we're choosing as the parcel with the highest quality score. And interestingly, we're actually matching less parcels with the UBID many-to-one approach than we are with the address many-to-one approach. But our claim is that they are better quality matches. If you look at the diagram at the bottom right-hand side, you can see that there are almost 15,000 hits that only occur when you use the address-based matching. And so this suggests that the address is not consistent with the geometry for the building or the land parcel. You can also see, though, in the center of the diagram that 445,000 of the matches are shared by the method, but the UBID approach finds matches that the address-based approach just will never be able to match because it's not relying on address, it's looking at geometry. Next slide, please. And here we're looking at the subsets of buildings and parcels that were matched. And you can see that, again, the address-based method finds buildings and land parcels and matches for them that the UBID method does not do, but we're claiming that this is because the address is not consistent with the geometry, that a large number of the results are shared. However, the UBID approach does find matches that the address-based approach does not. Next slide, please. And so here we're showing an interesting set of matches. So we've got a parcel that had no address, and it was assigned a UBID. And then we have 29 buildings that all have the same address, and they were all assigned UBIDs. And the UBID cross-reference algorithm found all of the matches between the one land parcel and the 29 buildings. Next slide, please. So we've assigned the UBIDs, we've joined the data sets together and cross-referenced them. We've then cross-referenced the land parcels with the property assessments, and now we're ready to view all of that data. And so here it is. What you're looking at right now is on the left-hand side, we have a chart of the number of buildings by year. Interestingly, we found a building from 1680. That's why the y-axis is going all the way down. And then what we've got is a faceted browser showing all of the building records filtered by different qualities. Central air in the top right-hand corner. What we've done is colored those bars by whether or not the building does or does not have central air, or if we don't know, given what's in the data. And then the remaining bar charts, their bars are colored proportionally by whether or not those buildings have central air. And so you can see we have bar charts for the category code of the building, interior and exterior condition of the building, the livable area, the shape of the parcel, and then the heater type and the heating fuel. And using this, we're going to identify some energy saving opportunities for buildings in the city of Philadelphia. Next slide, please. So what we've done is filtered the data by selecting buildings where they don't have central air conditioning and it's a single family building. And you can see that we've quickly identified some energy saving opportunities, specifically building electrification opportunities to replace furnaces and boilers with heat pumps. But we've also found that there's a data collection opportunity. Maybe we should go and gather more data because there are substantially more buildings where the heater type was undetermined or unknown. And we'd certainly like to know more about the distribution of fuels within those buildings. Next slide, please. So what are the challenges here? What lessons have we learned during this project? Data quality is a big challenge. Data diversity is a really big challenge. The mantra here is garbage in, garbage out. So you have to be prepared to clean your data and to filter it and to triage it. Now, selecting the appropriate grid resolution, we chose resolution level 11, and we also find that resolution level 10 works well. The choice really is motivated by the density of your building stock or your land parcel stock, and also the specific use case. If you want higher resolution, then you can select the size 11 or higher open location code grid resolution level. UBID storage and retrieval is another challenge. We find that it's best to store UBIDs alongside your other data. Storing them in a spatial database such as PostGIS also works really well because you can leverage UBID in your spatial queries. And then doing UBID at scale. We provide command line tooling and other tooling via the web that is available for assigning UBIDs to large numbers of buildings and land parcels. But quality control and quality assurance is essential. You have to look at the assigned UBIDs on the map, make sure that they are consistent with your data. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to just talk about some UBID highlights. We've been doing the UBID project now for over 3 years, and we've had a lot of fun with the project, and there have been some really interesting improvements and advancements that have been made, and I'd really like to just highlight some of them now. In September of 2020, Washington, D.C. released an open access data set of 185,000 UBID assigned building footprints. And we also completed the 2-year BEDA Accelerator as part of the Better Buildings Initiative, which brought together state and local governments, industry, academia, and researchers from the national labs. You can use UBID today in Energy Star Portfolio Manager to specify the UBID as a standard ID at the building and the property level. And for commercial entities, Building Footprint USA assigned UBIDs to 120 million building footprints. And this is a screenshot from visualizing some of those grid resolution level 11 UBIDs on the map. Next slide, please. And then I'd also like to mention the CREDA tools that's been developed by the Jacob Segui group at UNC Chapel Hill. And there's a really great video on YouTube. And this is for UBID-based address matching, but also address normalization. And it's being used for commercial real estate data. And what's really interesting about the CREDA tools workflow is it takes one address and decomposes it into multiple addresses, standardizes and normalizes those addresses, and then assigns UBIDs to the geolocated coordinates for those addresses. Lastly, I'd also like to mention the city of Portland, Maine, who assigned UBIDs to their energy benchmarking data for 2021. And you're also going to hear about the fantastic work that Chris and et al. Have been doing for Miami-Dade County. Next slide, please. So finally, I'd just like to talk about the next steps. Please, by all means, get in touch with us. We would absolutely love to help you. But there are also some wonderful resources available online. The Better Buildings Initiative have put out the Public Sector Implementation Guide for UBID. And this is well worth the read. It gives great instructions, but also guidance on how you can apply UBID in your government. And as I mentioned as well, there's open source code, other tooling and documentation available on GitHub. And I said it at the start of the slide, but I'll repeat it again. PNNL is always happy to help. Please get in touch with myself and Supriya. We'd love to help you incorporate UBIDs into your workflows. And next slide, please. With that, I'd like to say thank you very much for listening, and thank you once again to Celeste and the other organizers. And I'm going to hand over to Brandon.
Thanks, Mark. And I think we can launch right into handing it over to Chris to talk about their implementation in Miami-Dade County. And just a note, we will leave time for questions, hopefully at the end, but if you have any, feel free to enter them into a chat. We have sort of a running list that we're tracking. So thanks.
Great, thanks, Brendan. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, great. Yeah, so thanks Brendan, thanks Celeste, thanks all of you for having us here. We're really excited to join and sort of share our story on UBIDs. So Mark's just given us a wonderful, technical overview of how UBIDs are developed and some of the real power and potential of the tool. And so what I'm hoping to do with you all today is to tell a little bit of our story about how Miami-Dade County came to learn about UBIDs, how we developed a model and implemented it, and some of the use cases that we have developed so far, and some of the ones that we're thinking about for the future. And I think, most excitedly, we're happy to show off and do a quick demonstration of a tool that we've developed called Find My UBID, which is currently our main mechanism for sharing UBID data with internal and external stakeholders. So yeah, next slide, please. So again, we'll kind of talk a little bit about the Miami-Dade County Office of Resilience. That's who I'm here representing, and we've been one of the main partners in the UBID implementation team here in Miami-Dade County. We'll briefly review a little bit about the purpose and mechanisms behind UBIDs. Mark's obviously just done a great job of that. And then we'll run through some of the history, the current architecture for the system, and talk about, the main programmatic application that we've been using so far, which is through what we call our Building Efficiency 305 program. And we'll wrap up with a quick live demo just to show you all what our tool looks like and take it from there. So yeah, next slide. So just a quick introduction. So I'm here representing the county's Office of Resilience. We're a small team of about 15 people who primarily serve as internal consultants here to the county. So we work across 27 different county departments and provide assistance, technical assistance, guidance, analyses for all kinds of different resilience problems and applications. Our office has grown quite a bit over the last few years. We've started initially with just our mitigation, adaptation, and communication teams, but we've gladly welcomed our new Chief Bay Officer, Arella Begay, who's leading up our efforts to protect and restore Biscayne Bay. And we're also glad to welcome the first Chief Heat Officer, Jane Gilbert, who's done a great job helping coordinate our work on extreme heat. So I'm representing specifically our mitigation team. We focus on a variety of topics, but especially on building performance, sustainable buildings, construction, greenhouse gas emissions tracking, and basically anything related to trying to track and understand and mitigate the sources of climate change, energy use, and greenhouse gas emissions. And we're also the team that has primarily worked on implementing the UBIDs. So that's a little bit about our office. Next slide, please. So the main use case for UBIDs within the county is to help support what we call the Building Efficiency 305 program, also abbreviated as B305, which is a program that we've developed that targets energy and water efficiency improvements in large existing private and public buildings throughout the county. And when we define large, we mean generally 20,000 square feet or larger. And there's a lot of different components of Building Efficiency 305. I won't get into all of them now, but a key tenet of many of these programs is the use of benchmarking to help track energy and water use and performance over time. And this, of course, brings to us the key challenge, which Mark alluded to, which is tracking and maintaining accurate connections between these records through a variety of different databases. So, benchmarking large buildings would require maintaining not just a lot of internal databases, but also connecting to a number of different external databases that host different slices of building information. And maintaining, accurate data records across these platforms is difficult without, having a single standardized identifier, which is where UBIDs come in to really help this process along. Next slide, please. So again, I won't get too deep into this. Mark's already done a great job of introducing us to how UBIDs work, but we face the same challenge as many others, which is many of our databases historically have been based on traditional street addresses and just tiny differences in how those addresses are formatted. For example, 123 First Street versus spelling out 123 First Street can often make it difficult to reconcile these different records in databases. And just to give you a sense of some of the different places that we're looking to connect data, is we are looking to reach across our property appraiser database, which has a lot of great information about general building attributes and characteristics. Thinking about benchmarking, we obviously want to connect to the Energy Star Portfolio Manager platform and integrate that along with building attributes, but also we're thinking about how to pull together zoning code information, special business and taxing districts information, census and demographic information, and then we maintain a number of different resilience focused databases on things like sea level rise, flooding risks, extreme heat dangers and exposure risks, energy burden, and other equity data as well. And so you can see in the bottom right an example of a UBID that we've generated for our buildings here in Miami-Dade County, which follows that format that Mark's established and has those different components that allow you to sort of identify it as a natural key, and it's useful information just to look at the code itself. Next slide. So a little bit about the history. The Office of Resilience and on behalf of Miami-Dade County joined the Department of Energy's Building Energy Data Analysis Accelerator Program, BEDA, in 2018, as Mark had alluded to earlier. And through this program, we learned about UBIDs, which were developed by the Department of Energy and PNNL. We worked very closely with a couple of key colleagues in our information technology department to assist us with some of the heavy technical lift, and all of that was conducted in partnership with PNNL. We certainly owe them a great debt for all of their assistance, and I encourage any of you who are interested in using UBIDs to please reach out to them, reach out to Mark, as they've been a wonderful help to us throughout the process. So PNNL helped us to develop UBIDs for each of our buildings in Miami-Dade County, at which which point our ITD department then took that data, took those UBIDs, and chose to implement them through a geospatial database. We're hosting it through an ArcMap application. Of course, there's a number of other ways you can host UBIDs. And finally, the most recent step that we just wrapped up this year was to develop and publish the Find My UBID tool, which again we'll review in just a little bit here. Next slide. So currently the UBID geospatial layer is hosted by the Information Technology Department, and they are regularly updating this layer to make sure that the building records are accurate and reflect either demolitions or new construction. We are using the ArcHub platform as the main platform for hosting this information. This is it's fairly user-friendly, and also when we think about developing a public-facing tool, this provided us a lot of flexibility to easily deploy a tool that's not just accessible but also easy to use and again user-friendly. Right now, the UBID layer mainly references information from the property appraiser database. So we're looking at hosting a lot of building age, size, and height information. But we also have some key political information overlaid. We identify commission districts, commissioners, and some additional information we'll look at as we look at our example. And altogether, even though we started with a pretty small cohort of buildings, about 12,000 large buildings in the B305 program, we've assigned buildings up to about 550,000 buildings, or sorry, we've assigned UBIDs up to about 550,000 buildings at this point. So we have quite an extensive database that we are maintaining. Next slide. So as I mentioned, in the process of developing these models, rather than start with the entire list of 5,500 buildings, we decided to look at a specific list of about 12,000 buildings that represented buildings in Miami-Dade County that were greater than 20,000 square feet. We matched UBIDs to these buildings using a parcel folio as a common denominator. And from there, the model picks up all of the building footprints that are associated with these folios and also intersect with our list. So this would identify all buildings that are in this 12,000 building list, but it may also pick up others because, as you know, a parcel may have many building footprints on it, some of which would belong to our small cohort and others that do not. So to focus in specifically on this list of 12,000, the model would of course grab the centroid of that target building footprint and eliminate the ones that aren't part of this initial list as we were developing this model. Next slide. So in practice, again, the goal here is for our UBID model to be useful to people to participate in benchmarking. So as part of this B305 program, we're really pushing these large existing buildings to adopt benchmarking practices. Currently, it's on a voluntary basis, but as you all may know, many cities and counties are looking to develop building performance ordinances down the line that would make this mandatory. So right now, the typical workflow that we would expect is a building manager who's interested in participating in benchmarking would use the Find My UBID tool to identify the UBID for the Unique Building Identifier for their building. They can then link this UBID to their portfolio manager, which Mark mentioned is a great feature that's been added recently. And at that point, they're able to then share energy and water with our office, energy and water data with our office, and we can then use that to track performance over time. Again, at this time, it's a voluntary program, but we do anticipate that in the future, as we look to developing a building performance ordinance, that this would be a huge help to us in tracking any required compliance. And just recently, the city of Miami, which is a municipality within Miami-Dade County, actually passed the first building performance ordinance within the county. So again, we're looking to see adoption of this process really start to roll out in the next couple of years. Next slide. So testing the UBIDs, like I mentioned, right now the key program that we're using to roll this out within the county is what we're calling the B305 Challenge. This is a voluntary program for large existing buildings to enroll and start to understand how to participate in benchmarking. We've been using the Energy Star Portfolio Manager, which is a wonderful free platform if any of you are interested in checking it out. And we really were trying to target a wide range of public and private partners to join the challenge, a nice mix of not just building sizes, but also types of buildings, and looking also to recruit some of our iconic buildings in the county to sort of serve as flagship leaders and in the community of how this process is beneficial to building owners and managers. And we've got a great list here of participating companies and buildings as well. Next slide. So we still have a number of things to resolve in our UBID implementation. The work, of course, never ends. But in addition to this great start, we do also need to work on reconciling and doing a lot of QA and QC as we've started to join databases between property appraiser information, what we got in Portfolio Manager, and a couple of different databases that the Office of Resilience maintains. So again, to Mark's point, QA QC is essential not just in the beginning, but even ongoing to make sure that we have the most accurate and functional database possible. There's also the day-to-day maintenance of the tool itself of Find My UBID. So we're continuing a close partnership with our colleagues in ITD to make sure that the tool continues to run well and is able to maintain an accurate record of the current building stock. And again, as we go down the line, imagining that this could be very useful as we move towards building performance ordinances being more common in our municipalities, and a number of other different county processes and databases internally that we've identified as being helpful or that could be supported through the use of UBIDs. Next slide. So now we'll do just a quick live demo of Find My UBID. So again, our goal here was to develop a user-friendly public-facing tool that could allow anybody to easily find a UBID for their property. And in doing so, we really hope to encourage the ease of access to this information to accelerate UBID adoption for some of the purposes that we've imagined, but additional ones that we may see emerge from the community as well. And again, focusing on both internal and external customers. So while we will continue to move towards some of these larger community-wide programs, such as BO 305 continuing to expand, there's a number of internal uses that we've identified and are continuing to work across multiple departments to roll out. So with that, I believe, Celeste, maybe if you can hand me the screen sharing here, I'm happy to give people a quick demo of what our tool looks like. Great. Can you all see the screen okay? You should see a GIS application here. Okay. Great. So this is Find My UBID. Again, it's hosted through the ArcMap platform, which we found very easy and helpful to work with. It's fairly user-friendly from the behind the scenes. And of course, as you can see, it's a very natural sort of Google Maps or Apple Maps like application for the average user. So it's quite simple. We've got this mapping software, and on the top right, we've got a pretty simple address lookup. I'm going to go ahead and demo using our Stephen P. Clark Government Center building here in downtown Miami. So now that we've got the address pulled up here, we're just going to hit the magnifying glass. It should zoom us in here. Great. And if we zoom in a little bit further here to the heart of downtown Miami, we can see that just by entering a simple street address, and I should note that this search tool is able to process a couple of different variations. So if we were to enter, spell out First Street, we should be able to find the same building. And once we've identified our building, you can actually see in orange here all of the building footprints that have been overlaid over the base map. And by clicking on any one of these buildings, of course, we can click on the one that we've searched for, but equally we can kind of browse as well and just kind of click around to different buildings in the area. But if we choose one building, again going to our government center building here, you can see the first result, the first piece of data that's attached to it is the UBID in the format that Mark has reviewed with us. And additionally, we have our own internal unique ID that we've developed for these buildings. So we're looking at how to link these into existing identification systems that we have in the county. We've got all of our property appraiser data. So we've got folio number, address, city, zip code, a little bit of information about building type, as well as some of that political jurisdiction information. So you can look up the municipality code for your building. We have, I believe, 36 or 37 municipalities in the county. So sometimes just finding, where you live can be a challenge. So we hope that that's helpful here. the commission district and name of the commissioner, some additional information here about building characteristics and lot size. And then what we've chosen to include here is a direct link to Portfolio Manager. So trying to make it as easy as possible for those who are using the tool to just hop right over to Portfolio Manager, have their account logged in, and be able to just copy any of these information over. The most natural use case here is the UBID, but of course, if you're setting up buildings or setting up your portfolio for the first time, we hope that a lot of this other information can also be useful to have it handy here. We've also, in the interest of making this as accessible as possible, we've developed 2 additional resources here. So in the top left of our tool, we have a manual that we've put together that reviews some of the basics about how UBIDs, what is a UBID, how is it constructed, but also some practical tips on how to use the tool, different features, how to find your building and your UBID. And then the last thing we've put together here is an ADA text version. So while the map is very nice, we have an accessible interactive version in which you can just be presented with a simple search bar, enter your address. Let's see if it searches here. Sorry, we're getting a bit of a hang up here. All right, I think I'm having some internet issues here, but anyways, we've got this wonderful text version as well, and if when this were to finish loading, it would show a great text version here that's just more of a list style as opposed to the map style. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and let's see if we can cancel my screen sharing here. Thanks, Celeste. And so, yeah, just a quick shout out to our partners here in Office of Resilience, myself, my colleagues Patricia and Marta Morello, and of course our key partners in our information technology department, Stephen Inklin, Yvonne Rodriguez, and not listed here is Robert Brodsky, who have all been tremendous assets to us in implementing the technical aspects of this and developing and publishing the tool. Yeah, with that, I'll go ahead and wrap up our part. I'm happy to answer any questions you all might have about our experiences using UBID and some of the the many benefits that we've seen to it today and also into the future with other applications that we're identifying.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I think we have a little over 10 minutes for Q&A, but I just wanted to add to sort of try and wrap things up. We have heard today about sort of the technical side and the implementation side, and we wanted to bring both those perspectives together. We ultimately don't have any dogs in this fight at Energy Star, but we do see a lot of value in sort of this replicable and meaningful way to identify a building that could have application both within the government, for any initiatives you're developing or exploring, and then even more broadly, being able to attach anything that relates back to a building, asset information, information attached to sort of like the sale or lease of building. So I think it's sort of seen as like, a long-term, big picture value proposition in addition to the more immediate benefits with implementing any requirements. So yeah, with that, I think if folks have any questions, it'd be great to, we have, again, those 2 perspectives. So if you have questions around the technical side or on the implementation side, then ask away. And we're glad to play intermediary too with either Chris or Mark after this call if you want to reach out to us.
Everyone can unmute themselves as they would like to ask any questions.
Hi, this is Katie Hatcher. I'm on the line now as part of the Q&A session, and it would be interesting if anybody's willing to share in terms of attendees, if you're thinking of exploring the use of UBID, and you know, share your thoughts and reasons with others that are on the line today. I'm not sure exactly how many attendees we have. I think we've got maybe like 30. Many of you are familiar with each other from our regular state and local networking meetings.
I'm with the California Energy Commission. My name's Deanne Ross, and I was going to say, just don't take my lack of commenting. This was fantastic and full of information, because we are thinking about developing UBIDs for our benchmarking.
Great, great. And actually it's been, I think Eugene and Troy know that it's been on my list for a while, and thank you for chiming in today, to try to foster a pilot of the use of UBID statewide in California. And I guess for those that are interested in pursuing this, I think that it would be good to pursue it sooner than later, to just at least determine, you know, what you think it would take to get up and running with it, in terms of thinking through whether you then wanted to use it in your next data collection cycle, which, you know, many of you put your data requests out in February or soon thereafter. And so, you know, obviously sitting in the middle of December right now, you know, there's still time if you want to kind of move along with it without having to miss a whole year for data collection. For those of you using the data request process, if you miss adding it into your data request when you initially publish it, your option to then sort of add the field in there later on would be doable. You just have to republish your link, or you could always add it into your data request, and then provide additional instructions a little bit later on, you know, when you finish it up. And then if your list wasn't available for building owners with UBIDs yet, then obviously, like, you just send them a note that says, you know, or you don't add it into the instructions of what they're supposed to do, right? So there's a couple of sequential things to think through, and then there's a couple of options if your timing isn't quite right. But I just encourage you to start thinking about it now if you're interested.
Yeah, and Katie, this is Chris with Miami-Dade. If I could just add, I don't know if I clearly identified the timeline in our slides, but it did take us about 2 years, 2.5 years to go from being part of the beta accelerator all the way through now having our tool published this year. So, you know, that of course can vary on capacity and the size of your municipality, but just a sense of, you know, what it took for us to get this from the you know, built up from the ground up.
Yeah, and actually I have a question for you about the UBID Finder tool. How easy would that be for others to kind of replicate that tool on their own websites?
Yeah, it's a great question, Katie. So that was, you know, of that 2.5 years to get the entire UBID process up to the tool publication done. I think the tool's really been in development for about a year or so. So, you know, I'm not an ITD person. I can't comment exactly on the, you know, the back end architecture, how easy that is or not. But at least through the use of the ArcMap system, you know, it seemed, as someone who has a very basic understanding of GIS, it seemed like most of the lift had to do with developing the UBIDs. And then once we had that, you know, actually implementing that into the geospatial database and developing the tool was not, you know, was a little bit easier, I think. I'd love to reach out to our ITD colleagues to get their perspective, but that's just kind of what we've seen from our side of it in the resilience office.
And I'll just add in that from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mark or Chris, but one of the biggest sort of barriers is having an accurate footprint file. You know, developing the UBIDs themselves isn't difficult since it's all, you know, sort of consistent and standardized, but the footprint part of it seems like the bigger barrier that some folks might have that at the ready, but others might not. So does that jive with your understanding?
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Brendan.
Yeah, I would also agree with that, Brendan. And I would say as well, PNNL, as part of the UBID project, offers a lot of open source tooling that you can use for your software development. One of those tools is actually a drawing tool. So when you do have inaccurate building footprint data, we provide a tool that allows you to present the original building footprint to the user so that they can edit it, and then they can assign a UBID as part of the workflow. All of that tooling is available on GitHub, and if you reach out, I'm happy to speak more about it.
Yeah, and again, I just like to mention, you know, what a great partner PNNL has been in that process. We are very thankful for their assistance throughout that process.
And we had Adrian Etherton from the city of Brisbane in California share that they're using UBID for their building ID for benchmarking programs. Adrian, do you want to share anything else about your experience?
I am not sure if my microphone is working. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we actually had a consultant that we were working with to develop our benchmarking program recommend it, and I believe he worked with PNNL to help set us up with our UBIDs to get started in 2019. And then we are actually going to be pursuing a big technology and GIS upgrade throughout the city in the next year or so, and I'm hoping to convince staff that we should use the UBIDs more broadly so we can have better connections with our other data sources within the city. So it's been really interesting to see how things are working in Miami-Dade.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing.
And I'll just mention in this break that we are going to send around sort of a summary after this call. So we'll include the slides and also the conversation with the state of California and at least one jurisdiction from the local level reminded me of, there's sort of like an added value where, at the state level, you might not have access to like tax assessor data in order to develop these lists, and where there's sort of like state and local requirements coinciding, for consistency's sake, that can help too. So, there's a lot here, but just wanted to mention those 2 points.
And I'll go ahead and add to that, at the state level, there's been some difficulty mapping like utility accounts to physical buildings. And so, as states and locals kind of engage with PUCs and utilities, one possible pathway for the future is for utilities to be able to take in and utilize UBIDs as well to connect account information to a physical building location. That hasn't been done yet, but that's something else that we could all try to figure out who might be ready to pilot something like that with a willing utility.
All right, well, any last questions before we log off? I guess the main takeaway is if you're interested, please reach out. There's support available, and we appreciate everyone's attendance today. And thank you very much to Mark and Chris for your presentations and time. But we'll send around a follow-up note, and thank you again, and have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, everybody.